Maria and Joao had been searching tirelessly for the perfect pieces to complete their new home. After months of planning and saving, they had finally moved into a charming, old house on the outskirts of town. The house had character, with its creaky floors and vintage decor, but they felt something was missing. Determined to add their personal touch, they decided to spend a sunny Saturday morning exploring local garage sales in hopes of finding unique items. The neighborhood was alive with activity. Stalls lined the streets, each one offering a glimpse into someone's past. Antique furniture, stacks of old books, and various trinkets were scattered everywhere. Maria loved the thrill of the hunt, the excitement of uncovering hidden gems, while Joao enjoyed the stories each object seemed to whisper. As they wandered from one sale to the next, their enthusiasm never waned. Even as the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, their steps eventually led them to a quaint garage sale held by an elderly man known for his collection of antiques. The garage was cluttered with items ranging from old photographs to vintage kitchenware. It was a treasure trove waiting to be explored. Maria's eyes caught sight of something that made her heart skip a beat. A beautifully crafted clock displayed prominently near the entrance. The clock was unlike anything they had seen before. It stood tall on a wooden stand, its intricate design immediately drawing their attention. The wood was dark and polished, with delicate carvings of vines and flowers winding around its frame. The face of the clock was a masterpiece in itself, with elegant Roman numerals and ornate hands that seemed to move with a life of their own. What intrigued them most was the absence of any visible mechanism. No weights, no springs, nothing to indicate how it operated. "Look at this, Joao," Maria whispered, her voice filled with awe. "Isn't it stunning?" Joao stepped closer, running his fingers lightly over the carvings. "It's incredible. It feels like it belongs in a museum. But how does it work without any obvious parts?" The seller approached, a kind smile on his weathered face. "Ah, you have a good eye. That clock has quite the history. It was passed down through generations in my family. They say it has a mind of its own." Maria exchanged a curious glance with Joao. "What do you mean?" The old man chuckled softly. "Well, it's been running for as long as I can remember. Never needs winding, never stops. It just keeps going, marking the passage of time without any help." Intrigued by the mystery and captivated by its beauty, Maria and Joao decided to purchase the clock. After negotiating a fair price, they carefully transported the antique to their car, eager to see how it would fit into their home. Back at their house, they found the perfect spot for the clock in the living room, above the mantelpiece where it could become a focal point. As Maria hung it up, they both felt a sense of satisfaction. The clock added a touch of elegance and history to their space, something that would spark conversations and admiration from guests. That evening, as they settled into their new home, the clock became the centerpiece of their night. The room was softly lit, casting gentle shadows that danced around the room. They sipped their tea and enjoyed the tranquility of their first night, the clock quietly marking each passing hour. But as the night deepened, Maria began to notice something unusual. The clock seemed to hum with a subtle energy, its ticking almost inaudible, yet undeniably present. She glanced at Joao, who was reading a book on the sofa, oblivious to the slight disturbance. Shaking off the feeling, she returned to her own reading, trying to ignore the strange sensation. As midnight approached, the clock struck 12. The chime was melodious, but there was something different about it, an eerie resonance that sent a chill down Maria's spine. She glanced around the room, feeling a sudden unease. The shadows seemed to linger a bit longer, the air grew colder, and a faint whisper echoed softly, almost too faint to hear. Maria nudged Joao gently. "Did you hear that?" Joao looked up from his book, his brows furrowed in confusion. "Hear what?" She pointed towards the clock. The chime. It sounded different. Joao listened carefully. The clock's chime was indeed slightly off, as if there was an underlying discordance. "Maybe it's just the acoustics in here," he suggested, trying to reassure her. But Maria couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She felt a strange compulsion to keep watching the clock, as if it held secrets waiting to be uncovered. The room felt charged with an unseen presence, making the hairs on her arms stand on end. The next morning, the couple woke up to a bright, sunny day. They were both exhausted from the previous night's unsettling experience, but tried to brush it off as their imagination. Over breakfast, Maria couldn't help but stare at the clock, wondering about its mysterious nature. Maybe we should look into its history, she suggested to Joao. There's something about it that doesn't feel right. Joao nodded thoughtfully. I agree. It's beautiful, but there's an aura around it that's hard to explain. Let's see if we can find any information about it. They spent the rest of the day researching the clock, diving into old records and reaching out to antique experts. Surprisingly, they found very little information. The clock didn't match any known models or manufacturers, and there were no records of previous owners beyond the current seller. The mystery only deepened their intrigue, making them more determined to uncover its origins. As days turned into weeks, the clock became a constant presence in their lives. It was always there, ticking away the seconds, marking the passage of time in their home. But with each passing hour, strange occurrences began to unfold. Maria and Joao would hear footsteps in empty rooms, see fleeting shadows out of the corner of their eyes, and feel an unshakable sense of being watched. At first, they tried to rationalize these events. Perhaps it was just the old house settling, or their minds playing tricks on them after the initial unsettling night. However, the frequency and intensity of the strange happenings increased, making it impossible to ignore. One evening, as they sat together watching a movie, the clock struck 3. The room seemed to freeze for a moment, and the temperature dropped noticeably. Maria wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. Joao, do you feel that? He nodded, his eyes darting around the room. Yeah, it's like the temperature just plummeted. They exchanged worried glances, both feeling the weight of the clock's presence. The once beautiful and elegant timepiece was now a source of unease and fear. Determined to understand what was happening, they decided to seek the help of a local historian who specialized in antique artifacts. The historian listened intently as they described the clock and the strange events that had followed its arrival in their home. He promised to look into it and get back to them, leaving Maria and Joao with a mixture of hope and apprehension. As the days continued, the clock remained relentless. It never stopped ticking, never paused, and always seemed to be the harbinger of the inexplicable. Maria and Joao found themselves living in a constant state of anticipation, wondering what the next hour would bring. Their once peaceful home was now tainted with an air of mystery and dread, all centered around the enigmatic clock they had brought into their lives. Little did they know, their discovery was only the beginning of a terrifying journey that would test their sanity and push them to the brink of madness. The clock, with its endless ticking and mysterious origins, was about to unleash a curse that would distort their reality and trap them in a cycle of fear from which there might be no escape. Maria and Joao felt a sense of accomplishment as they carefully hung the antique clock above the mantelpiece in their living room. The room, already filled with a blend of modern and vintage decor, seemed to come alive with the addition of the clock's timeless elegance. They stepped back to admire their handiwork, the clock's intricate design perfectly complementing the space. As the evening settled in, the couple began to relax, enjoying the tranquility of their new home. The clock, with its constant ticking, provided a comforting rhythm to the room. Joao poured himself a glass of wine, while Maria settled onto the sofa with a book. The soft glow of the lamp cast gentle shadows, creating a cozy atmosphere. Hours passed peacefully, and the clock continued its steady march. Maria glanced at it occasionally, appreciating its beauty. However, as midnight approached, she noticed something peculiar. The clock struck 12 with a chime that seemed louder and more resonant than usual. The sound echoed through the room, lingering in the air longer than expected. She exchanged a puzzled look with Joao, who was engrossed in his book. "Did you hear that?" Maria asked, her voice tinged with curiosity. Joao looked up, slightly confused. Yeah, it sounded a bit different. Maybe it's just the acoustics in here. They tried to dismiss the oddity, but Maria couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As the clock continued to tick, they began to notice subtle changes in their surroundings. The familiar sounds of the house, creaks, footsteps, and the hum of appliances seemed slightly out of sync. It was as if time itself was behaving unpredictably. The next morning, Maria woke up feeling unusually tired, despite having a full night's sleep. João was already up, making coffee, but his movements seemed sluggish. Breakfast was an odd experience. Their usual conversation felt disjointed, and time appeared to drag on longer than it should. Maria glanced at the clock, which was still ticking incessantly, its hands moving with unwavering precision. Maybe it's just jet lag from all the moving, João suggested, trying to rationalize their strange experiences. Maria nodded, though uncertainty lingered in her mind. Throughout the day, they noticed more irregularities. Their schedules felt disrupted. Appointments seemed to take longer than necessary, and simple tasks felt unusually time-consuming. At first, they attributed it to the stress of settling into a new home, but the consistency of these anomalies made them uneasy. In the following days, the clock's influence became more pronounced. Each hour marked by its chime brought subtle distortions to their reality. Lights would flicker momentarily, and the temperature in the room would shift without explanation. Maria found herself glancing at the clock more frequently, her unease growing with each passing hour. One afternoon, João returned from a walk to find Maria staring intently at the clock. "Is everything okay?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. She hesitated before responding. "I've been feeling like time is slipping away from us, like we're not in control of our own schedule. It's subtle, but it's there." João frowned, taking a moment to consider her words. "Maybe we should check the clock again, see if there's anything we missed." They examined the clock meticulously, searching for any hidden mechanisms or signs of tampering. Despite their thorough inspection, they found nothing unusual. The clock continued to function flawlessly, its beauty unmarred by any defects. Frustration began to set in as they struggled to understand the source of their growing disorientation. As the days turned into a week, the couple's lives became increasingly intertwined with the clock's mysterious behavior. Their once harmonious routines were now disrupted by the clock's relentless ticking and the accompanying temporal distortions. Maria and João started keeping a journal, documenting each irregularity in hopes of finding a pattern or explanation. One evening, as they reviewed their notes, they realized that the anomalies coincided precisely with the clock's hourly chimes. Each time the clock struck the hour, their perception of time shifted slightly, making minutes feel like hours and hours feel like fleeting moments. The couple began to feel trapped in a cycle where time no longer adhered to its natural flow. The strain of these experiences began to take a toll on their relationship. Frustration and exhaustion bred tension, leading to arguments and sleepless nights. Maria felt a growing sense of desperation, while João struggled to remain calm and find logical explanations. The clock, once a symbol of their new beginning, had become a source of anxiety and fear. Determined to regain control, Maria suggested they take a break from their research and try to live without focusing on the clock's disturbances. However, the clock's influence was pervasive, making it nearly impossible to ignore. Even when they tried to distract themselves with activities or social interactions, the subtle distortions of time lingered in the background, casting a shadow over their daily lives. One night, as the clock struck 2, the couple experienced their most intense disturbance yet. The room seemed to bend and twist, the walls warping in impossible ways. Shadows danced unnaturally, and an oppressive silence filled the space. Maria clung to João, both of them overwhelmed by the sudden surge of fear and confusion. "We need to figure this out," João said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "We can't keep living like this." Maria nodded, her determination reignited. They realized that the clock was not just a passive object, but an active force disrupting their reality. The mysterious historian they had contacted seemed to be their only hope for understanding the clock's true nature and finding a way to break its hold on their lives. As they prepared to seek further assistance, the couple couldn't help but wonder what other secrets the clock held and how deep the curse truly ran. Their peaceful home had become a battleground against an unseen force manipulating time itself, and Maria and João knew that their journey into the unknown was only beginning. The days following their initial disturbances were a blur of unease and unanswered questions. Maria and João tried to maintain their normal routines, but the presence of the clock cast a persistent shadow over their lives. Each hour marked by its chime seemed to herald new and inexplicable phenomena, gradually eroding their sense of security. It began subtly. At first, it was small things: a misplaced book on the shelf, a picture slightly askew on the wall. They dismissed these as the result of their own forgetfulness or the house settling. However, as the clock continued its relentless ticking, the anomalies grew more frequent and unnerving. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the living room, Maria was preparing dinner. She reached for a spice jar on the counter, only to find it had moved from its usual spot. Puzzled, she shook her head and returned to her task, attributing it to her distracted state. But when João came home later, he noticed the same jar was now missing entirely, leaving only a faint residue where it had been. "Did you move the spice jar?" João asked, raising an eyebrow. Maria frowned. "No, I was the one who just put it there." João shrugged, though unease flickered in his eyes. Maybe it got knocked over somehow. They continued their evening, but the atmosphere was tense. The clock's chimes echoed through the room, each one seeming to linger longer than the last. As midnight approached, Maria felt a chill sweep through the house. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, glancing nervously at the clock. When the clock struck 12, the room seemed to hold its breath. The chime was louder and more resonant, vibrating through the walls. For a moment, everything was still. Then, the lights flickered, plunging the room into brief darkness before returning to their dim glow. Maria's heart raced as she looked around, trying to pinpoint the source of her growing fear. "João, something's not right," she whispered, her voice barely audible. João set down his drink, concern etched on his face. "I feel it too. It's like the air has changed." They sat in silence, the oppressive atmosphere thick around them. Maria glanced at the clock again, noticing how its hands seemed to move with an unnerving fluidity, almost as if they were dancing to an unseen rhythm. Shadows twisted and elongated, creeping along the walls in unnatural patterns. The temperature in the room dropped noticeably, and Maria could see her breath forming faint mist in the air. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the hallway. Startled, they rushed to investigate, finding nothing out of place. The front door was securely locked, and every room appeared untouched. Yet, the sense of being watched intensified, and the shadows seemed to move with a life of their own, whispering secrets they couldn't comprehend. That night, sleep eluded them. Every time the clock struck an hour, Maria and João were jolted awake by strange noises. Footsteps on empty floors, doors creaking open and shut, and soft, indistinct whispers that seemed to come from the very walls. The relentless disturbances left them exhausted and on edge, their minds fraying under the constant strain. Determined to find answers, Maria delved deeper into her research. She scoured antique forums and contacted other historians, hoping to uncover any information about similar clocks or curses. João, on the other hand, tried to create a semblance of normalcy, rearranging furniture and adding new decorations in an attempt to distract himself from the growing paranoia. Despite their efforts, the disturbances only escalated. Objects began moving with increasing frequency and force, often without any logical explanation. A vase would topple from a shelf, shattering into pieces, or a chair would slide across the room, leaving Maria and João to wonder if they were losing their grip on reality. The shadows, once subtle, now darted across the room with alarming speed, sometimes taking on grotesque shapes that vanished as quickly as they appeared. One particularly harrowing night, as the clock struck 3, the manifestations reached a new level of intensity. The temperature plummeted, and an eerie silence enveloped the house. Then, the air seemed to thicken, making it difficult to breathe. Maria and Joao stood frozen, watching as the shadows coalesced into a dark, formless shape that hovered in the center of the room. It pulsated with a malevolent energy, radiating fear and despair. "We need to leave," Joao whispered, his voice trembling. Maria nodded, her eyes wide with terror. "We can't stay here with this thing." They hurriedly packed their belongings, deciding to spend the night at a friend's house to escape the oppressive atmosphere. As they drove away, the clock continued to tick, its presence lingering in their minds. The road ahead was uncertain, but they knew they couldn't ignore the escalating horrors any longer. Back at home, the clock remained, its hands moving with an unyielding persistence. Maria and Joao felt a lingering sense of dread, knowing that the clock's influence was far from over. The strange occurrences had only just begun, and the couple realized that they were entangled in a nightmare from which there seemed to be no escape. Their quest to understand the clock's dark secrets was now more urgent than ever, as the boundary between reality and the supernatural continued to blur, pulling them deeper into a cycle of fear and uncertainty. The days blurred into one another as Maria and Joao struggled to make sense of the relentless disturbances emanating from the antique clock. Each hour brought new anomalies, but none as perplexing as the sense that time itself was looping. At first, the repetitions were subtle, brief flashes of déjà vu or minor events that seemed to reset. However, as the clock continued its unwavering ticking, the cycles became more pronounced and disorienting. One morning, Maria woke up feeling an unshakable sense of familiarity. She went through her usual routine, making coffee, reading the newspaper, and checking her emails. Everything proceeded as expected until she glanced at the clock. It was 8 a.m., exactly the same time she had woken up an hour earlier. A chill ran down her spine as she realized the day was repeating itself. She called Joao to wake him, her voice trembling with urgency. "Joao, something's wrong. It's happening again." Joao groggily emerged from the bedroom, rubbing his eyes. "What do you mean?" Maria pointed to the clock. "It's 8 a.m. again. We're stuck in a loop." Joao stared at the clock, disbelief etched on his face. "I don't understand. We just went through this morning." Determined to find a pattern, they decided to document each day meticulously. They kept detailed journals, noting the exact times of each event and any deviations from the norm. As the cycle repeated, they began to notice that certain moments would reset precisely at the hour, forcing them to relive the same experiences over and over. The feeling of being trapped in an endless loop took a psychological toll. Maria and Joao became increasingly frustrated and exhausted, their attempts to break the cycle only seeming to reinforce it. They tried varying their routines, staying up later, waking up earlier, but nothing seemed to alter the relentless repetition. One afternoon, as they sat together in the living room, the clock struck 3. The air around them shimmered, and for a brief moment, the room seemed to rewind. The sounds of the house, the ticking of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator, reversed direction, creating a disorienting effect. Maria and Joao exchanged worried glances, realizing that the clock was manipulating not just their perception of time, but the very fabric of reality around them. "We need to find the source of this," Joao said, his voice strained. "There has to be a reason the clock is doing this." Maria nodded, her mind racing with possibilities. They revisited the information they had gathered from the historian, hoping to uncover any clues that might explain the clock's behavior. The historian had mentioned that the clock was passed down through generations, but had not provided any details about its origin or purpose. Frustrated by the lack of information, the couple decided to delve deeper into their research, exploring old libraries and reaching out to experts in supernatural phenomena. As the cycles continued, the distortions in reality grew more intense. Memories of past events began to blend with the present, creating a surreal tapestry of time where past and present coexisted in an uneasy harmony. Maria found herself recalling conversations and actions that had already happened, while Joao struggled to differentiate between what was real and what was part of the loop. One evening, as the clock struck 5, the couple experienced a particularly vivid repetition. They found themselves standing in the hallway, reliving the same moments from earlier in the day with eerie precision. The air felt thick with tension, and the shadows in the room seemed to pulse with a life of their own. Maria felt a surge of panic as she realized that their attempts to escape the loop were futile. "We can't keep doing this," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "We're losing ourselves." Joao placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We need to stay strong. There has to be a way out." Their determination to break free led them to experiment with the clock itself. They tried stopping it, but the hands continued to move, unaffected by their efforts. They attempted to dismantle it, but the mechanism remained mysteriously intact, refusing to yield to their attempts. Each failure only reinforced the sense that the clock was an indomitable force, controlling the cycle with an unyielding grip. As the cycles dragged on, the couple's sense of time became increasingly warped. Minutes felt like hours, and hours like mere seconds. Their perception of reality twisted, making it difficult to distinguish between what was happening and what was merely a repetition. The once welcoming home now felt like a prison, each room a reminder of their entrapment. One night, during another relentless loop, Maria had a vivid dream. She saw the clock in a dimly lit room, its hands spinning uncontrollably. A shadowy figure loomed over it, whispering words she couldn't understand. The dream felt more real than any of their waking experiences, leaving her shaken and desperate for answers. Upon waking, Maria shared the dream with Joao. "I think the clock is trying to communicate with us. Maybe there's something we need to do to break the cycle." Joao considered her words, realizing that their previous attempts to understand the clock had been purely reactive. Perhaps they needed to take a more proactive approach, uncovering the clock's true purpose and the intentions behind its endless ticking. They returned to the historian with their latest findings, including Maria's dream. The historian listened intently, his expression grave. "There are ancient legends about time-manipulating artifacts," he explained. "Clocks like yours are said to be gateways or anchors for temporal energies. If not handled correctly, they can trap individuals in endless cycles, distorting their perception of reality." Maria and Joao felt a glimmer of hope. "Is there a way to reverse it?" Maria asked urgently. The historian nodded slowly. "There might be. The key lies in understanding the clock's origin and the specific rituals or conditions required to release it from its temporal bindings. You need to uncover the history of the clock's previous owners and any rituals they may have performed." Determined to break free, the couple intensified their research, scouring every available resource for information about the clock's lineage. They discovered references to a family that had owned similar clocks for generations, each one associated with peculiar time-related phenomena. The last known owner had vanished under mysterious circumstances, leaving behind only fragmented accounts of their experiences. As they pieced together the history, Maria and Joao began to realize that the clock was more than just an antique. It was a conduit for powerful, otherworldly forces that sought to control and manipulate time. The infinite cycle they were trapped in was a manifestation of the clock's dark influence, a desperate attempt to keep them bound until the curse could be lifted. With this newfound knowledge, they felt a renewed sense of purpose. They knew that to break the cycle, they had to confront the clock's origins and perform the necessary rituals to sever its hold on their lives. The journey ahead was fraught with uncertainty and danger, but Maria and Joao were resolute in their determination to reclaim their lives from the endless loop of terror. As the clock continued its relentless ticking, marking each passing hour with an unyielding precision, the couple prepared themselves for the challenges that lay ahead. They understood that their battle against the clock was not just a fight for their sanity, but for their very existence within the distorted reality that the curse had created. The infinite cycle was their prison, and breaking free would require every ounce of courage and resilience they could muster. The relentless ticking of the antique clock had become the heartbeat of Maria and Joao's lives, each chime echoing through their home with an ominous persistence. As days melded into nights, the couple found themselves grappling not only with the cyclical distortions of time, but also with the gradual unraveling of their perception of reality. The once clear boundaries between past, present, and future began to blur, plunging them deeper into a labyrinth of confusion and fear. Maria was the first to notice the cracks in her reality. It started with fleeting images that flickered at the edge of her vision, memories that weren't her own and glimpses of events yet to unfold. She would be reading a book when a scene from her childhood would overlay the pages, vivid and intrusive. At other times, she saw flashes of possible futures, moments that felt both distant and imminently close. These visions left her disoriented, struggling to distinguish what was real from what was a mere apparition of her mind. One evening, as Maria sat alone in the dimly lit living room, she experienced a particularly intense vision. The room around her seemed to dissolve, replaced by a vast, empty expanse where the clock towered above her, its hands spinning uncontrollably. She reached out to touch it, but her hand passed through the image, leaving her grasping at nothing. The sensation was so real that she could feel the cold metal of the clock's frame and hear its deafening tick-tock, amplified to a deafening roar. She jolted awake, her heart pounding, drenched in sweat. João noticed the change in Maria immediately. Her eyes were haunted, shadows underlined by sleepless nights. He tried to comfort her, but his own sense of reality was slipping away. He felt time slipping through his fingers, moments stretching into eternity or collapsing in on themselves. Tasks that once took minutes now consumed hours, while hours seemed to vanish in the blink of an eye. It was as if the clock was warping the very fabric of time around them, making each second unpredictable and unreliable. One afternoon, João returned from an errand to find Maria staring blankly at the clock, her hands trembling. "Maria, are you okay?" he asked, concern etched on his face. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, her eyes glazed over as she recounted a vision she had just experienced. "I saw our house, but it was different. The walls were melting, and the clock was everywhere, controlling everything." João reached out to take her hand, but his touch seemed to have no effect. He felt disconnected, as if there was a barrier between them that he couldn't penetrate. "We need to figure this out," he said firmly. "We can't let this clock destroy us." Their attempts to seek help only deepened their sense of isolation. The local historian had provided some insights, but the answers were still elusive. They reached out to experts in paranormal phenomena, hoping for a solution, but each inquiry led to more questions. The clock's origins remained shrouded in mystery, its purpose unknown and its power seemingly boundless. As the distortions intensified, Maria and João began to experience moments where the past and future collided with their present reality. Maria would catch herself in conversations where the same phrases were repeated, words that had been said weeks ago resurfacing out of nowhere. João found himself in places he had never been, walking through rooms that didn't exist in their home. These inexplicable shifts left them disoriented and increasingly distrustful of their own minds. One night, as the clock struck 4, the boundaries of reality seemed to shatter entirely. The living room warped around them, walls bending and stretching in impossible ways. Maria and João stood at opposite ends of the room, their reflections in the mirrors showing versions of themselves that were twisted and distorted. They reached out to each other, but their hands passed through, unable to make contact. The room pulsed with a dark energy, and the air was thick with an oppressive silence that pressed down on their chests. "We need to stay together," Maria whispered, her voice trembling. "We can't let the clock tear us apart." João nodded, though he felt the words slipping away from him, lost in the shifting sands of time. They clung to each other, trying to anchor themselves amidst the chaos. The clock continued its unending tick-tock, each strike resonating with the fractures in their reality. Shadows danced around them, whispering secrets that made no sense, further eroding their grip on what was real. Desperate for answers, Maria delved deeper into ancient texts and forgotten lore, searching for any mention of time-manipulating artifacts similar to their clock. She discovered obscure references to cursed timepieces that could trap their owners in cycles of distorted time, feeding off their fear and confusion. These artifacts were said to be created by dark forces intent on controlling the flow of time itself, bending it to their will. Meanwhile, Joao experimented with the clock, hoping to find a way to disrupt its power. He tried altering the time, turning the hands backward and forward, but the clock remained steadfast, its mechanism unresponsive to his attempts. Each failed experiment only seemed to strengthen its hold, tightening the invisible chains that bound them to the distorted timeline. One evening, as the clock struck 6, Maria experienced a profound vision. She saw herself and Joao standing before the clock, surrounded by ethereal figures cloaked in shadows. They spoke in unison, their voices echoing through the void. To break the cycle, you must confront the source of the curse. Only then can time return to its natural flow. Maria woke with a start, the message clear in her mind. She shared the vision with Joao, and together they realized that their only hope lay in confronting the very force that had ensnared them. They needed to understand the clock's true origin and the dark magic that powered it. Their quest led them to an old, abandoned mansion on the outskirts of town, rumored to be the last known residence of the clock's original owner. The mansion stood silent and foreboding, its windows dark and uninviting. As they stepped inside, the air grew thick with a sense of foreboding. Dust-covered furniture and decaying walls told the story of a place long forgotten by time. In the heart of the mansion, they found a hidden study filled with ancient tomes and cryptic symbols. Among the clutter, they discovered a journal belonging to the clock's previous owner. The entries detailed the creation of the clock, a vessel for temporal energies designed to manipulate and control time. The final entries hinted at a failed ritual meant to harness the clock's power, resulting in the curse that now plagued Maria and Joao. Armed with this knowledge, Maria and Joao returned home, determined to perform a counter-ritual that could sever the clock's hold on their reality. They gathered the necessary ingredients, following the instructions from the journal with meticulous precision. As they began the ritual, the clock responded violently, its ticking accelerating to a frantic pace. The room shook, and the air crackled with energy as the boundaries between dimensions thinned. The final incantation echoed through the room, and a blinding light enveloped them. The clock's hands spun wildly before coming to an abrupt stop. Silence descended, the oppressive weight lifting as the distortions began to dissipate. Maria and Joao felt the fabric of time realigning, the chaotic fluctuations smoothing into a steady, natural flow. As the light faded, they found themselves standing in their living room, the clock now still and silent. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted, replaced by a calm and familiar serenity. They embraced each other, relief washing over them as the nightmare of the infinite cycle came to an end. Though the clock was no longer a source of terror, Maria and Joao knew that the experience had left an indelible mark on their lives. They had faced the darkest corners of their reality and emerged stronger, their bond fortified by the ordeal. The clock, once a symbol of their entrapment, now served as a reminder of their resilience and the fragile balance between time and sanity. As they settled back into their lives, the clock remained on the mantelpiece, its beauty unmarred by the chaos it had once wrought. Maria and Joao had learned to respect its presence, understanding the delicate equilibrium that governed time itself. They continued their quest to uncover the remaining secrets of the clock, determined to ensure that no one else would fall victim to its relentless power. Their journey was far from over, but they faced the future with newfound courage and unity. The clock had tested their limits, pushing them to the brink of madness, but ultimately, it had strengthened their resolve. Together, they were ready to confront whatever mysteries the clock still held, ensuring that the cycle of terror would remain broken and that time would flow freely once more. The days following the counter-ritual were filled with an uneasy calm. Maria and Joao felt a profound sense of relief as the oppressive atmosphere that had plagued their home began to lift. The clock, once the source of their torment, now stood silent on the mantelpiece, its hands frozen in time. They hoped that the nightmare was finally over, that the relentless cycle of terror had been broken for good. However, the peace was short-lived. As they settled back into their daily routines, subtle signs indicated that the curse had not been entirely vanquished. At first, it was the small things: strange noises in the middle of the night, fleeting shadows that darted across the walls, and an unshakable feeling of being watched. They dismissed these as remnants of their previous ordeal, attributing them to stress and exhaustion. One evening, as Maria was tidying up the living room, she noticed something peculiar. The clock, now still, began to emit a faint rhythmic ticking. Her heart raced as she approached it, convinced that the curse had returned. But when she touched the clock, the ticking ceased immediately, leaving only an eerie silence in its wake. She shook her head, trying to dispel the growing sense of unease. João entered the room, sensing Maria's distress. "Is everything okay?" he asked, concern etched on his face. Maria hesitated before speaking. "I thought the ticking started again, but it stopped as soon as I touched it. Maybe it's just my imagination." They decided to leave the clock untouched, hoping that any residual effects would fade over time. Yet, as the nights passed, the disturbances became more intense. The strange noises grew louder, the shadows more defined, and the feeling of being watched more palpable. It was as if the clock's curse had merely been dormant, waiting for the right moment to resurface. One particularly restless night, Maria awoke to the sound of frantic ticking. Her eyes snapped open to find the clock's hands moving rapidly, the hands spinning uncontrollably as the ticking grew louder and more insistent. Panic surged through her as she realized the curse was far from over. "João, the clock, it's moving again," she cried, her voice trembling with fear. João rushed into the room, his expression mirroring her terror. "I heard it too. What do we do?" Desperate to stop the clock once more, they attempted to dismantle it, but their efforts were in vain. The hands continued to spin, and the ticking intensified, filling the room with an oppressive noise. The air grew thick, making it difficult to breathe, and the temperature plummeted, sending chills down their spines. As the clock struck midnight, the room seemed to warp and distort. The walls stretched and bent, creating an illusion of an endless, dark corridor. Shadows danced ominously, and the oppressive silence was shattered by disembodied whispers that echoed through the space. Maria and João clung to each other, their fear mounting as the manifestations grew more aggressive. "We need to leave," João whispered, his voice barely audible over the cacophony. "We can't stay here with this thing." They fled the house, seeking refuge at a friend's place, hoping that distance would free them from the curse's grip. However, the disturbances followed them. Strange occurrences plagued their temporary sanctuary, doors slamming shut on their own, objects moving inexplicably, and the relentless ticking that seemed to echo in their minds even in the quietest moments. Exhausted and on the brink of madness, Maria and João realized that the clock was not just a passive object, but an active force determined to torment them. The historian they had consulted earlier provided little help, unable to offer concrete solutions beyond the fragmented information already uncovered. The couple felt isolated, their trust in each other wavering under the strain of constant fear and uncertainty. In a last-ditch effort to end the curse, Maria delved deeper into ancient texts and obscure folklore, searching for any mention of similar artifacts and the means to destroy or contain them. She discovered references to a forbidden ritual, one that required immense courage and a willingness to confront the darkest aspects of oneself. The ritual was said to sever the bond between the cursed object and its victims, but it came with no guarantees and demanded a significant sacrifice. Desperate and running out of options, Maria shared her findings with João. "This might be our only chance," she said, her voice resolute despite the fear in her eyes. "We have to try the ritual. It's risky, but we can't keep living like this." João nodded, his determination solidifying. "We've come this far. If there's even a slight chance it will work, we have to take it." They gathered the necessary materials outlined in the ancient texts: candles, specific herbs, and symbolic artifacts, and prepared themselves mentally and emotionally for the ordeal ahead. The ritual required them to confront their deepest fears and insecurities, a daunting task given the toll the curse had already taken on their sanity. On the chosen night, they returned to their home, the clock still standing silent on the mantelpiece. They set up the ritual space, lighting the candles and arranging the herbs and artifacts as prescribed. As they began the incantation, the room filled with a palpable tension, the air thick with anticipation and dread. The moment the final words were spoken, the room erupted in chaos. The clock's hands began to move once more, spinning wildly as the ticking reached a fever pitch. The walls seemed to close in, and the shadows grew more menacing, twisting into grotesque shapes that lunged towards them. Maria and Joao held each other tightly, their minds struggling to remain focused amidst the turmoil. A blinding light enveloped them, and they felt themselves being pulled into a vortex of time and space. Memories, both cherished and painful, flashed before their eyes, each one a fragment of their lives intertwined with the curse. The weight of their past mistakes and fears pressed down on them, threatening to break their spirits. In the midst of the chaos, a profound silence descended, and the light faded, leaving them standing in their living room once more. The clock was still silent, its hands frozen in time, but the oppressive atmosphere had lifted. Exhausted but hopeful, Maria and Joao realized that the ritual had worked. They were free from the curse. However, the victory came at a cost. The intense emotional and psychological strain left them both fragile, their minds teetering on the edge of exhaustion and lingering fear. They knew that the experience had irrevocably changed them, leaving scars that would take time to heal. In the days that followed, the couple focused on rebuilding their lives. They sought professional help to cope with the trauma, attending therapy sessions and finding solace in each other's support. The house, once a battleground of supernatural forces, began to feel like a sanctuary once more, the silence of the clock a constant reminder of the battle they had endured. Yet, despite their efforts to move forward, remnants of the curse lingered. Occasionally, Maria would catch a glimpse of shadows moving in the corner of her eye, and Joao would hear faint echoes of the clock's ticking in the stillness of the night. They understood that true healing would take time, and that the ordeal had left an indelible mark on their lives. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Maria reached out and gently touched the clock. "It's over," she whispered, a mixture of relief and lingering fear in her voice. Joao nodded, taking her hand in his. "Yes, it's finally over, but we need to stay strong and support each other." They decided to keep the clock as a reminder of their resilience and the strength they had found within themselves. It no longer ticked incessantly, but its presence served as a symbol of their journey through darkness and their triumph over the unknown. As they embraced, Maria and Joao felt a renewed sense of hope. They had faced the unimaginable and emerged stronger, their bond fortified by the trials they had endured. The curse of the endless clock had tested their limits, pushing them to the brink of madness, but ultimately, it had revealed the depths of their courage and the power of their love. Their lives would never be the same, but they were ready to face whatever the future held together. The clock remained a silent sentinel, a testament to their ordeal and a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit could prevail. The days following the intense ritual were a mixture of relief and lingering unease for Maria and Joao. The oppressive atmosphere that had once enveloped their home had dissipated, leaving behind a calm that felt almost surreal after the chaos they had endured. The clock, now silent and still, stood as a stark reminder of the ordeal they had survived. Yet, despite the apparent peace, both felt that something was still unresolved. Maria often found herself gazing at the clock, her mind replaying the events that had led them to this point. The visions, the distortions of time, and the relentless cycle of fear had left deep scars on her psyche. Joao, too, struggled with the aftermath, finding it difficult to fully trust the normal flow of time again. Their bond, though strengthened by shared adversity, was now tested by the shadows of their past experiences. One evening, As they sat together in the living room, Maria voiced the thoughts that had been weighing heavily on her. Do you ever feel like it's not completely over? Like there's still something left unresolved? Joao nodded slowly, his eyes reflecting the same uncertainty. I've been thinking the same thing. Even though the clock is silent, I can't shake the feeling that there's more to this. Maybe the ritual only addressed part of the curse. Determined to ensure that the curse was fully lifted, they decided to revisit the historian who had initially provided them with information about the clock. They hoped that with their recent experiences, the historian might offer deeper insights or additional steps they needed to take. The historian welcomed them warmly, though his eyes showed signs of concern upon hearing their story. I'm relieved to see you both safe, he began. But it seems the curse of the clock was more complex than I initially understood. Breaking the cycle was a significant step, but there may be residual energies that need to be addressed to ensure complete release. He explained that some curses leave remnants that can linger, affecting the environment and the individuals involved. These remnants might require additional rituals or protective measures to fully dispel the lingering dark forces. Maria and Joao listened intently, absorbing every detail in hopes of finding a definitive end to their nightmare. Armed with this new information, they returned home to prepare for another ritual. This time, the historian provided them with a more comprehensive guide, outlining the necessary steps to cleanse their home and protect themselves from any residual energies. The ritual required them to create a protective circle, use specific herbs and symbols, and recite incantations designed to sever any remaining ties the clock had with the supernatural forces. On the chosen night, Maria and Joao meticulously followed the instructions. They gathered the required items, lighting candles and arranging the herbs around the room in the prescribed pattern. The air was thick with anticipation as they began the incantations, their voices steady despite the tension that lingered in the room. As they chanted, a subtle shift occurred. The temperature in the room rose, and a faint, almost imperceptible hum filled the air. The clock, still silent, seemed to vibrate with a hidden energy, its presence now more commanding than before. Maria felt a surge of determination, her fear tempered by the resolve to finally free themselves from the clock's lingering influence. The room grew brighter as the candles flickered, casting long shadows that danced along the walls. The couple focused on their intentions, channeling their collective will to break any remaining bonds. The historian's words echoed in their minds, guiding them through each step with precision. Suddenly, a powerful force swept through the room, causing the candles to blaze brightly before extinguishing in an instant. The air was filled with a cacophony of whispers and echoes, voices from the past and future intertwining in a chaotic symphony. Maria and Joao held each other tightly, their minds grappling with the intensity of the experience. As the final words of the ritual left their lips, the room fell silent. The oppressive weight that had once burdened their home lifted completely, replaced by a serene stillness. The clock, now completely inert, seemed to lose its presence, becoming just another antique piece in their living room. Exhausted but hopeful, Maria and Joao knew that the final release had been successful. The residual energies had been dispelled, and the curse was truly broken. They felt a profound sense of closure, the nightmare that had haunted them for so long finally coming to an end. In the days that followed, life gradually returned to normal. The shadows that once lurked in the corners of their vision no longer appeared, and the strange noises that had plagued their nights ceased entirely. Maria and Joao found solace in each other, their shared experience fostering a deeper connection and understanding. However, the journey had left them changed. They had delved into the darkest corners of the supernatural, facing fears that had threatened to consume them. To cope with the trauma, they sought professional help, attending therapy sessions to process the events and rebuild their sense of security. The support from friends and family also played a crucial role in their healing, reminding them that they were not alone. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset from their porch, Maria reached out and touched the clock. "It's truly over now," she whispered, a sense of finality in her voice. Joao nodded, pulling her close. "Yes, it is. We've been through so much, but we made it out stronger. They decided to keep the clock in their home, not as a reminder of the fear it had once brought, but as a symbol of their resilience and the strength they had found within themselves. It no longer held any power over them, its presence a testament to the battle they had fought and won. As time passed, the memory of the curse began to fade, replaced by the warmth of their restored lives. Maria and Joao continued to share their story, hoping to warn others about the dangers of meddling with unknown forces and the importance of facing fears with courage and unity. Their experience had taught them the fragility of time and reality, and the lengths to which one might go to preserve their sanity and protect their loved ones. The clock, once a harbinger of endless terror, now stood as a silent guardian of their story, a reminder that even in the darkest times, hope and determination can prevail. In the end, Maria and Joao emerged not just survivors of a supernatural curse, but stronger individuals bound by love and the unbreakable human spirit. Their lives, forever intertwined with the tale of the endless clock, were a testament to the power of perseverance and the enduring quest for peace and understanding in the face of the unknown.